Hi, I'm Janice Perkins with Methods of Leaders. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar with David Peterson. Early in 2011, David joined Google as the Director of Leadership of Coaching, where he provided coaching to senior leaders, ran the internal and external coaching program, and supported a range of executive development and organizational learning programs. He is the author and co-author of numerous articles in two best-selling books, Leader is Coach and Development First, Strategies for Self-Development. Most recently, he authored the chapter on executive coaching for the APA Handbook of Industrial and Organizational Psychology. He is a frequent speaker at conferences on coaching, leadership development, and organizational learning. He's been featured in the Harvard Business Review, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, USA Today, and many more. Thank you for joining us today, David.
Thank you, Janice. I'm so pleased to be here today.
I am too. I'm really excited to dive into some things. And I have to start with kind of a slightly fan question. And what was it like working for such a big company like Google?
Well, when I started at Google, it was not so big. It was just about to enter the Fortune 500 in terms of size. And while I was there, I left last year for a couple of new ventures that I'd been working on. But over the course of my time there, it quintupled in size and quickly became one of the highest revenue companies in the world, most valuable companies in the world, and totally transformed, at least in terms of my experience there, from a small, very focused company, which was just doing search, to one of the most diverse companies in the world. And it was just awesome to see all of that happening.
So what was it like then? And what does the organizational change look like when it was small versus when it became so mammoth?
One of the key things was it shifted from an intense focus on a few things like search and Gmail, which were huge businesses. YouTube was acquired, and so that was just starting to take off back then, like really, really grow fast. And so very relatively small and very, very focused to relatively big and so diverse. And what happened is that autonomy in the culture enabled all of these things to start and to grow. And then it reached a point where now getting coordination among them, getting leaders to agree on the intersection and the interdependencies, that started to become a little bit more problematic. A lot of my coaching at the time was, how do you move fast in a very matrixed world where everybody else is moving really fast as well?
So were those some of the biggest challenges that you encountered then in that growth period?
It's interesting. When I look back on my own journey there, when I first started, Google did not have many sophisticated HR processes. Laszlo Bach was building all kinds of cool, amazing things, and so we kept getting better at that. But onboarding was something that I focused on early in my coaching and the leadership development, and helping people land. So new leaders would come in from other organizations. That increased as Google grew because so much of the internal talent was developing themselves, but we had to grow faster than that. So we started hiring a lot of external leaders. So early on, I focused on onboarding. As Google grew, it didn't make sense to support that as much through coaching. And so we started to develop development programs for onboarding senior leaders. And that has been a big part of the journey that I saw. I would find a topic where there were a small number of leaders who needed something desperately. I would meet that need with my team through coaching, and then more people, more leaders, bigger organization, and we would transfer or migrate the work of the coaching to leadership development programs. So we did that essentially for onboarding new leaders. We did it for what we called scaling. I would coach leaders whose organizations were doubling or tripling in size in a year. And at first, it was just a fairly small number, people whose orgs went from 50 to 200 people, or from 500 to 1,000, or 1,500 to 4,000. And so now that's being addressed primarily through leadership development programs. And then in the last few years, what happened was that organizational complexity started shifting and increasing. And so, how do we help leaders manage work across teams, across functions? And so, decision making and governance and organizational design. So I actually ended up starting off doing this through coaching, but I ended up leading the organization design team for several years, which was also fascinating. So I would coach leaders and work with their teams on designing a more agile, adaptable organization.
So, what would you say your biggest success was coming out of that time period?
Exactly what I've been talking about, that
Okay.
identifying a need, serving it myself through coaching, and again with other of our executive coaches, internal and external, and then when realizing when we needed to pivot and helping to design and hand off the work of coaching to a broader program. So that transition from owning something, growing it, building it, and then handing it off to a team of people to handle, doing that 3 or 4 times in different topics, to me that was the biggest success, was recognizing here's a need, I'll do what I can to meet it through coaching, and then designing and handing off, I think, really effective leadership development programs.
You know what I love about, as you describe that journey, is something that I think a lot of leaders need to hear, is that the gifts and talents that we've been handed, like the way your brain works, David, is set up to do that so well. And you were handed something that you were really good at, but the way you're thinking and strategy and the way you conceptualize things and can structure and build and see things coming enabled you to also step into more and more, in because you felt like you're in that cruise control. This is my gifts and talents. And you really were able to showcase what you could do in an organization like that might not have come forth if you hadn't been put in that seat on the bus. So I find that really extraordinary. And it set you up in this experience to do what you're doing now in your own ventures, which is, I want you to talk more about that leading in complexity and what you do when you get to that stage as a leader, especially through the times that we've been through.
Thank you for saying that. A friend of mine is always asking everybody she meets, what's your superpower? And I've had a hard time answering that question until recently, where I think my superpower is connecting the very small, faint signals of a need and seeing where it might go over time. And so, like I said, I would coach an individual or 2 individuals or 3 individuals, and suddenly there's the pattern. Now, what will this look like in 5 years or 10 years? So I really try to play the long game and think about, where is this going? And then part of that superpower is handing things off. And so that, I think, is part of the lesson for others as well. There's an article called "Give Away Your Legos," that so many managers want to build their team and collect all their Legos and control them, but you get more power by handing things off to people. And in times of complexity, back to the heart of your question here, leaders have grown up in a world where they're often the one who's in charge of things and making decisions and having to figure out the vision. And in a world of complexity, no one person can do that. You need a broader network. You need diverse perspectives. You need to work hard at diversity and inclusion, because it might be somebody who comes from a very different background or different context who has the answer or a new insight or a creative way to look at something. And so the importance of the network, as opposed to even the organization or the leader, increases. And the value of getting diverse perspectives increases dramatically.
So I don't want to short you here. I want you to tell me more about your background, because your life didn't start at Google in 2011. You have been walking into leadership throughout your career. So tell me about the beginnings of that. How did you get to this space?
For some reason, I'm inclined to tell you a really, really silly story here. I was walking into a leadership development program very early in my career, and I was thinking, how do I introduce myself? And I thought, okay, I'm going to lead by saying I'm an executive coach. And as I was walking into the building, there was a huge bus parked in front of the hotel, and on the side of it, it said executive coach. And I thought, am I an executive coach? Am I a bus just shuttling people from one place to the next? And at that moment, I said, coaching is one of the things I do. I am not a coach. I am someone who cares about leadership development and helping people grow and learn. And it's that fascination with learning and development very broadly that has propelled me to this point. So thinking about the outcome is leaders are more effective. Their organizations are more effective. People feel more fulfilled and rewarded in the organization. And so my mission became making learning and development easier, faster, better, and more rewarding for people and their organizations. So coaching is just one of the things I do, along with, you mentioned the books that we've written. I wrote early in the development of executive coaching, I wrote 2 books with my colleague, Mary D. Hicks, one on coaching, leader as coach, and one on self-directed development. So it's speaking to the coach and to the learner and how they work together. And today, I feel like so many people have fallen in love with executive coaching. There are thousands of books on executive coaching and very few books on developing yourself, which I think is one of the key skills for leading in times of change and complexity. How do you develop yourself? How do you manage your own learning and growth?
I love that story. Knowing you now, that story is even more enjoyable to me to hear. I want to touch base on a video interview you did with the Institute of Coaching, that it takes a coach about 10,000 hours to become great. Why is that? Can you speak to that?
The notion of 10,000 hours goes back to some early work done by Erickson and then popularized by Malcolm Gladwell, and talking about how long it takes to develop expertise. It actually varies quite a bit across different, like you could become an expert juggler in way less than 10,000 hours. But something that's complex and sophisticated and requires a long time to learn and different skills really takes a lot of intentional practice to develop expertise at. And so something like 10,000 hours for becoming a master coach. And what I saw is, by the time I had coached about 50 or 60 or 70 people, I started feeling like, okay, I know what's going on here. And then by the time I had coached 300 or more, I thought, oh, now I see a whole different level of patterns here and dynamics. And I start to see, because just the sheer volume, more patterns, more ideas. And then about 1,000, after coaching about 1,000 people, I realized this is just natural and intuitive. And so I actually started studying the development of mastery and expertise. What does it take in different fields? How long does it take? How do you accelerate that development? And so my passion for learning and development and helping others learn and grow really led me to think about, how do we accelerate learning and development? And so on the coaching side, we teach courses in the Coach Accelerator. How do you accelerate your coaching and development? We have a program with some of my colleagues, the Leadership Accelerator, where we use disruptive experiences to help leaders develop learning agility. So I differentiate learning ability from learning agility. Learning ability is what many people are really good at. How do I learn this next thing? How do I figure out what I'm working on now? How do I make sense of this thing? Learning agility is, how do I take what I've learned in other situations and contexts and apply it to a situation or context I've never seen before? So can I learn across domains, across disciplines, across systems? And that's where I'm really focused on. And I think that's the key skill for leaders, where the world is going to be different in a few years. You have to be good at learning and at learning agility.
I love that. And every time we have a conversation, David, of course, you always blow my mind. I love that concept. And it really ties into some of the VUCA training that I've heard you do over the last couple of years. Nobody was prepared or set up with any set of experiences of how to walk through this, right? And so what you're talking about in complexity as leaders and that agility, I love that is so empowering to not allow a leader to be overwhelmed by a lack, but to draw from other places in order to have a gain.
One of the things that I see is the pandemic has been such a fantastic scenario for looking at, dealing
Mm-hmm.
with disruption, dealing with chaos, dealing with change. And one of the most common questions I hear that concerns me is, when will we get back to normal? When will we get back to the office?
Mm-hmm.
And some people are saying, well, it'll be the new normal. My view is change is only increasing. So the pace of change is accelerating. The kinds of things that are changing are changing. And so constant learning has become essential, as opposed to the old models of change were always about unfreezing the behavior, learning a new approach, refreezing behavior. There's no refreezing anymore. It is
Mm-hmm.
just adapting and adapting and adapting. And in so many organizations, people feel change fatigue, reorg fatigue, disruption fatigue. That is normal now. So,
Mm-hmm.
how do leaders get better at connecting with people, at supporting them through this? And the emotional and social side of leadership becomes increasingly important, compared to like the logical, rational side of things, which continues to be incredibly important. But the people side, the emotional side, so many people talk about that as important, but it's kind of a nice to have. And in this world of constant stress and disruption, it is absolutely essential for leaders. How can you make sure that people trust you and will follow you when the answers are not clear and everything's changing and there's so much uncertainty and ambiguity around us?
So I want you to expand on that because I think that that's something that a lot of people in this audience would love to hear more about. In that through this pandemic, what leaders are challenged by is a multiplicity of things, and how do they keep their focus and put their energy on the right things? When it's is it about being a change agent? Is it about being more adaptive? Is it about keeping the organization afloat? Being given more emotional security. Talk about that balance and where leaders are shifting their focus to remain strong.
It's all of those things, Janice. That's what makes me smile here. You're like, yes, 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 yes. And it just continues. They don't go away. So
Mm-hmm.
this period of constant disruption, it's not totally disruptive every single day, but you don't know what's coming tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so, number one, developing a strong sense of who are you as a person? What kind of leader do you want to be? What will ground you and provide you the stability that you need as a human being, as a leader, to get through all this? Second, providing a compelling mission and vision for your team that's adaptable. So when people, I'm probably not going to be able to think of a great example here. Let me think about that. But um, everybody's like, how do we get better at Zoom? And like, we're going to become a Zoom culture. Well, in another year, who knows what the technology will be? Who knows what kind of culture we'll be having? There's augmented reality and virtual reality. At some point, do they replace Zoom? And does that disrupt you? Or do you see these things coming? So it starts with getting clear about who are you, what do you stand for, but then looking outward. What's going on around us? Looking forward. What's coming? What can we start to anticipate? And in a rapidly changing environment, especially whether you're growing or shrinking, I will often ask leaders, where do you and your organization need to be a year from now? Let's
Mm.
start designing for that, start solving for that. Because otherwise, you end up being so reactive. You wake
Mm-hmm.
up, like, oh, a new problem. Oh, a new problem. Oh, a new problem. Well, there's a pattern here. What are the problems you anticipate 6 months or a year from now? And for senior leaders, it's often 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Many times I've said, where do you want to be 5 years from now? And one of the funny answers that I've heard more than once is 5 years doesn't exist. Like, we have no idea. Like, we can barely see around the corner. But and that also led to some other work I'm doing, seeing around corners.
Mm-hmm.
So I do a presentation on seeing around corners, because if the world is changing, you want to know what's around the corner. You don't want to turn the corner and be hit by a bus. And so I've come up with a few metaphors that illuminate this, I think. One is, you can see around corners if you can lift yourself up. Imagine getting into a
Mm-hmm.
helicopter and going above the city. Now you look down, you can see all the corners and you can see around corners. So lifting yourself up on the balcony, up on the stage, you can see differently. You can see around corners through working with others. I mentioned the importance of getting input from diverse perspectives. Imagine you had a friend or a colleague on a phone at every corner in the city. Now you have a network that can see everything together when you share your insights and perspectives. So you can see around corners through community and networks and connections. And there's probably a dozen other metaphors for that, but that notion of, how do we see around corners? How do we anticipate what's coming? You don't know what's going to happen in 5 years, but you can start to see and anticipate trends.
Well, I love what you're saying, because it also illuminates that negative side too, David, which is seeing around corners isn't possible if I stay in the same place and I'm in solitude. That
Yes.
that is what I heard more than anything, and profoundly, that we can't be rigid and we can't be stagnant right now. We have to allow the current of where we are to continue to help us move.
Yes.
So, what has changed in the industry of coaching, especially in this more digital centric world we're living in? What has changed for you, or what do you see the trends becoming?
I felt very fortunate in two ways in the past few years. Number one, Google has great virtual technology. So we were doing many of our meetings on video conferencing and virtually. And at the same time, the other business that I started, Seven Paths Forward, was a virtual training program. So we were using video conferencing and
Mm-hmm.
webinars to train coaches around the world. So when COVID hit and everybody started working from home, I was already extremely familiar with coaching and doing webinars virtually. And we already had a program running virtually. So I was disrupted less than I think many other people were. But the shift for so many coaches who only did work in person or on the phone to video conferencing was dramatic and challenging for many people. Everybody's adapting there, but thinking about augmented reality, virtual reality, what's going on there? Thinking about apps and devices and even some of the biometric tools. So coaches, some of them wear their exercise watch, or they track their steps and all of these things. But how can we start to use those technologies in coaching? And
Mm-hmm.
so, are there reminder apps, habit building apps that coaches can use? So many folks look at this as a competition for their work. And I look at it as a supplement to our work.
Mm-hmm.
How do
Mm-hmm.
we partner with new evolving technologies? How do we incorporate them? How do we help our clients learn to use them and incorporate them more effectively? So it creates it's another example of the constant change. Coaches have to be
Mm-hmm.
adapting faster than the pace of their clients, and leaders need to be adapting faster than the pace of change around them. And I think, sadly, very few people are actually equipped to change faster than the pace of change. And so that's where coaching can be an incredible tool for people, helping them learn and grow faster.
So, David, you say the phrase that GDSA, go do something amazing. Tell me about that.
Well, I have a leadership model. So I have a lot of different frameworks and models that I use, but I'm fascinated by. So this is going to be a longer answer than maybe than you expected, but the context is important here. So seeing around corners, I mentioned, but looking ahead, looking inward, looking outward, looking forward. I really value reflection. Can you look forward and see the patterns? Can you look back and see the trends and see what's happening? So that ability to see, to perceive what's going on inside you, outside you, in other parts of the world, even seeing through diverse lenses, seeing things from other people's perspectives. All of that becomes so important. And so I have a leadership development framework that starts with looking inward, looking outward, looking forward, and then I thought, okay, you've done a lot of looking here. Time to act. Time to go do something. Because the whole point of looking is to make sense of things.
Mhm.
But then what matters to you? So what's going on? What do you see? Second, what matters to you? And third, what are you going to do about it? And I want people to think big picture, long term, big picture. So go do something amazing. GDSA. So look around, look inward, look forward, then go do something with that. That is the whole point of all of
Mhm.
this learning and self awareness. It's to be effective, make things better for yourself, your company, your family, your community, your world. And so those are the components that I focus on in my coaching. What do you see? Are you aware of what's going on? What matters to you, to your, I think about spheres of significance. So what matters to you as a person, to your family, your community, your team, your organization, your society, and you can think bigger and bigger and bigger. And that in many ways is the key to maturity. It's the key to long-term success,
Mhm.
long-term resilience, and adaptability.
I love that because I'm an avid learner, and there's been so many times that I have information, but not application. And there's not a bridge between how to implement this and use it in my life. It's just a really interesting thing that goes, wow, that's amazing. So I love that taking all of those points of reflection and then putting them into action. So I'm going to let our audience know David's been working on a course for our Methods of Leaders program about leading in complexity and VUCA times. So we're really excited about that course. Will be coming out sometime next year. And I want you to talk to me about, as an internal learning and development person at Google, what is an online program like Methods? How can it be worked in conjunction with existing programs and organizations?
I love multiple perspectives and multiple modalities. There's people have different preferences for how they learn. People have different needs for how they learn. Asynchronous, can I just go online and look something up? Can I go find a video? Can I find a course? And so I love having a variety of different modalities and methodologies to use. And so the internal development programs are great, but they tend to focus on what does the average leader need, or what does this segment of leadership need. And a course like the ones you offer are phenomenal, both for large scale kind of learning and development on a given topic, or more individual needs. Is there a program for this particular topic that I want? Yes, there is. Here, you can go look at the methods program. You can go look at these other webinars. But it helps create a fantastic portfolio of offerings for different audiences and different needs.
Thank you so much for putting that so eloquently for me and tying up our conversation with a bow. David Peterson, where can people find you?
David Peterson at sevenpathsforward.com is probably the best way to do that. David Peterson, DavidPeterson at sevenpathsforward.com. That's one of my businesses. It's where I check the email most frequently. So recommend that. And LinkedIn, of course.
Perfect. I always enjoy speaking with you. You are a delight and a treasure. I hope that our audience has really gotten to absorb the knowledge that you have and the insight that you've given them today. I thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Janice. It is a pleasure speaking with you as always. Thanks.
I'm Janice Perkins with Methods. Thanks again for joining us today for this webinar.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.